I just read 3 chapters of The Great Gatsby, so it's pretty late. This may or may not be a good video, but people want it, so I'll just put it up here just in case anybody still wants to listen to it. So we're going to be talking about essentially Nixon, Ford, and Carter all throughout the 70s. And so, first off, we'll talk about conservatives. Essentially, they were becoming stronger, they were becoming more of a thing, their opinions becoming more pronounced, such that Nixon, when he was running for president, courted conservatives, even though he funded and signed off on liberal policies. So, he would sign off funds for Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. He created the Environment Protection Act. He created the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, EPA and OSHA. He increased the budget of the National Endowment for the Arts, the NEA, and he championed the Family Assistance Plan, the FAP, which would be essentially a replacement of welfare. And because he wanted to win at all cost, he was a politician, and which also kind of led to him eventually getting into Watergate. But he also had a freeze list of people who shouldn't be invited to the White House and an enemies list of people who should be watched constantly. And then internationally, Vietnam is sucking. They've started bombing Cambodia, even though it was a neutral state, and they're trying to get more Americans out of Vietnam, starting a new policy called Vietnamization, as in we would pull troops out, and we would train the South Vietnamese troops and provide air support, and essentially we get more boys out of the war. Although it's still pretty hard to keep this fight going, protests keep going on, especially within the army, with fragging of officers, attacks on the officers, massive drug use, and just soldiers being like, why are we here, and why are we still fighting? And people killed protesters at Kent State University, and then 2 more were killed at Jackson State College. And so, even though this was all happening, remember that in some polls, a bunch of people blamed the Kent State students for the violence, and that a bunch of Americans supported invading Cambodia. So not only is there your anti-war people, there is your we're not doing more enough for the war people. And as the 72 presidential election is coming along, the Paris peace talks go nowhere, because we try to say, okay, we'll let you leave your troops in, and you'll give us back our people, and we'll leave. And then the South Vietnamese president, Thieu Nai, that, not talking Vietnamese, Thieu said that, what the fuck? You never told us that you'd be leaving North Vietnamese troops inside South Vietnam. Get the fuck out of here. And so, after his re-election, Nixon expanded bombing in a 12-day Christmas bombing, where the past presidents are clearly more bombs than that were dropped in the last 3 years. So yeah. But eventually, in 73, a ceasefire took effect and all ground combat troops left the country. And though the U.S. provided aid in the form of bombing and advisors, they wouldn't really be able to help them fight off the North Vietnamese in the years ahead. While that shitstorm was going on, we made friends with China. That was the thing. Nixon went over to China and decreased tensions. Now we have more economic and friendly relations with them. Also, we eased some tensions with Russia and created SALT I, the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty, and the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, so that we could stop having so many nukes that could destroy everything so much. Although at one point, Israel did kind of take our weapons that we supplied them with and attacked Egypt and Syria and almost took them over until the US went like, hey, wait, you better stop, buddy. And Nixon did support friendly Arab governments, including Saudi Arabia and Iran, which kind of works. It was just kind of weird. They also allied with the militaristic Pakistan against India, and that didn't go too well whenever Pakistan put down a Bengali revolution that the U.S. kind of turned away from. And so the Indians and Bengali people went like, United States? They can go fuck themselves. And in Chile, the CIA came about again and overthrew a government. Normal CIA shit. Finally, Nixon announced a new economic policy that would have the dollar float about freely instead of everything being based on the dollar. The dollar floated about like everything else. And so, the long-term result of not having any more stability was a little bit weird. But yeah. And now for movements. Politics and culture. The women's movement is a thing. Whoopee. Women are running for office, and they're getting into office. State governors, women elected into Congress, and demonstrations. Just, you know, a woman doing a protest thing. Whoopee. Details. Yeah. Also, Roe v. Wade happened, so now abortions are legal. Whoopee. Or something. And there is also an Equal Rights for Women Act that happened. Oh yeah, the ERA. It was an Equal Rights Amendment, but that eventually fell apart after, what is it? After, it's later on, but I'm just gonna get this over with now. Phyllis Schlafly, a prominent conservative protester, along with others, created the Stop ERA initiative, which went like, hey, fuck you, no. So yeah. There is also this group called the Moral Majority, which would get 2 million conservative voters into the fight. So yeah. More conservative opinions. Woo. More movements include the United Farm Workers movement, led by Cesar Chavez. The American Indian movement, AIM, went on some protests from a siege of the abandoned prison on Alcatraz, and a siege on the village, and a takeover of the village of Wounded Knee, where they faced off against the FBI. And eventually, Congress would start passing some acts called, including the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act and the Indian Education Act. And they started recognizing Indian tribes as, you know, legit people again. Integration problems were moving up north, with Boston losing its fucking shit over trying to integrate schools. New York was kind of New York got screwed up whenever some education boards tried to move white teachers into black neighborhoods. And overall, the North is just like, wait, crap, now we have to integrate. And also, affirmative action is a thing now. And so somebody sued the universities because he felt that he was only not in because they forced themselves to admit 16% black people in. And the Baca decision said that ruled that that the race-based things were illegal, and while 4 others said that affirmative action was constitutional. And so the 9th Justice, Lewis Powell, went like, yes, he should be admitted, but like, you can't be excluded solely on grounds of race, but it can be a consideration, basically striking the middle ground. As one law professor said, it was a landmark occasion, but the court failed to produce a landmark decision. Although in Lau v. Nichols, school districts were forced to make accommodations for people who didn't speak English, and Congress signed stuff like the Education for All Handicapped Children Act so that kids could get the education. And also, with the new immigration law in effect, much more people are coming from all around the world. And also, interracial marriages are becoming more often. And so it's pretty hard to say what a kid is whenever they have one Asian parent and one Central American parent. And the Central American parent had a Central American parent and black parent who may have had a white parent and a black parent. Like, who are you at that point? Question mark? Anyways. Oh yeah, and gay people are coming out of the closet now and like having positions in politics, and the American Psychology Association said, hey, being gay is actually not like a mental issue. Yeah. And also there was a Woodstock Music and Art Fair where people went there, got high, got on drugs, swam naked, and listened to music. Although drugs were kind of a problem when eventually people like Janis Joplin and Jimi Hendrix died from ODs, and yeah. Rock and roll though, dude. Rock and roll. Talked about conservatives. Oh yeah, economics. Stagflation happened where there was high unemployment and high inflation, which basically meant the economy was committing seppuku all the time. Also because we also kind of had a massive federal spending and massive tax. And the country eventually started talking about a misery index for how fucking depressed we all were about unemployment and inflation. Also, since OPEC hates us because, we're fucking around in the Middle East, we have much more expensive oil, which sucks. So yeah, that's a thing. Watergate happened! And then Nixon resigned. You can look up the details of Watergate somewhere else, I'm lazy. And then Gerald Ford came in. And then he didn't really do much. Yeah. Also, South Vietnam has fallen by now. Just so you know. And he kind of undermined some of Nixon's detente efforts, where where Nixon was trying to build better relationships between us and the USSR. Then after Ford kind of fell, Jimmy Carter came in, and then he didn't really do much. So yeah. He tried to do a lot of things for energy and be like, guys, we need to stop using oil and we need be doing solar and wind and stuff and have a gas guzzler tax and all sorts of stuff. But then Congress went like, no, fuck that shit. And also, a nuclear reactor at 3 Mile Island went down, and then everyone's like, fuck nuclear. That's bullshit. Okay, let's see. Carter basically ignored realpolitik, so he didn't take realistic, nuanced looks at foreign politics. He did sign SALT II, but that eventually fell through. He did create the Camp David Accords between Egypt and Israel, so that there was some peace. But then the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, and the Senate went like, we're not going to approve SALT II. Go fuck off. And then the U.S. boycotted the 1980 Summer Olympics in Moscow. And then over 60 nations also boycotted the Olympics. And so Carter was starting to not be popular. And then there was the Iranian hostage crisis, where the embassy got taken over, who held them there until 1981, because we were smart. So after Carter came Ronald Reagan. Woohoo. The conservative god, essentially. And so now Ronald Reagan's the president. We can talk about the 80s later. Have a good night.